Hello, welcome. You've arrived at the process, lesson 22. We're going to be now digging into the running back position. This is part 1A. Hopefully, helping you win your fantasy football drafts. My name is Dr. John Bush. There's been 21 lessons before this. Please go back and, in my opinion, you should start at lesson 1 and move up. But anyway, if you're jumping around, again, we're going to look at the running back position here. Next few slides, and we'll see what's going on. Let's see if we can't find some nuggets to help us out for our drafts coming up here this summer. Okay, so again, '02 to 2020, looking at the end of season rankings from the 1st to the 12th running backs here. Again, if you haven't caught on, and I'm sure if you've listened to some lessons you have, I think it's essential to understand the general landscape. I believe that leads to more sophisticated forecasting using the so-called reference class forecasting approach. I have a lesson just on that. It's very simple, but you should be surprised very few actually apply it. I do use metrics first and then judgment next as far as looking at that. We are all biased. We think we're better than we are skillfully, and we ignore luck in our successes and blame bad luck for our failures, which we should blame ourselves. So this whole process is just trying to get us on an even keel so that we can kind of approach the complexity of fantasy football. It is a systems game, a weekly game, and you've got to apply various approaches, different directions, top down, bottom up approaches in looking at the metrics and data, and hopefully, that helps us out there. Me too. So, end of season rankings, let's look at it, see what we got. And these are the fantasy football uh, numbers of points scored by the 1st through 12th running backs by each year, '02 to 12. I have circled in purple the tops per column and circled the bottoms in red. And here's some things to look at. Just kind of soft viewing, it looks like '02 and '03 were the golden age of running backs here. We haven't seen a lot of purple in a long time, since about '07. 2015, I remember it well. I looked into using zero running back approaches, and that was the worst year, or one of the worst years for running backs ever. Okay. Not sure we'll see something that dramatic, but sometimes you can get lucky and be on the right drafting style to, take advantage of what happens. Again, looks like the higher scores tended to be in the early years across the rankings. McCaffrey in 2019 really blew the lid off that at 469 at 2019. Here it is. And we had a couple of blips here that were running backs in the 4th and 5th slots. 2020, we weren't the worst or the best. We were certainly even worst of 5 years if you look across here. Not too bad here, not too bad, but we see we had in this range here 5 of the uh, lowest scores. So it's not all uh, gr great news as far as running backs. And there is uh, what we're seeing the later years is we're not getting as much production out of our top 12 running backs that we've seen in previous years. So, uh, not sure if people have been playing since 02, 03, the game's changed. Okay. And so that's one of the reasons I like to track that. I want to see, you know, when and where that changes. Or if you stuck to the same kind of feeling about running backs, then you would be mistaken uh, in modern times versus looking back in history there. And the colorization, green is the top and red is the bottom here. And I colorize across all the metrics on the table. Here I looked within the columns and colorized blue is high, red is low. We see 2015 stands out, jumps out, and we see that we've had some lower production actually last year in the 4th down to the 12th running back. So what that will do is it's going to exacerbate the early running back drafting. So in 2020, it was best to have grabbed one of the top 3 running backs. If not, you really didn't get a lot of bang for your buck there. In fact, you lost. And so that's important to realize. And that metric was really extreme last year. And I'm suspecting that some of that was COVID. If you look at 2019, you're not seeing anything like that dramatic. We're almost talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the 9 slots from 4th to 12th were poor, looking across the 18 years there. So if you drafted early running backs and you happened to snag one of the end of the season top 3, you probably did fairly well compared to your competitors there that were not uh, in such a good shape there. Okay, so just kind of think about what this is saying. If we move back to an 18-19 format, then the extremity of having the top 3 running backs a little more relaxed than it was. So I'm not sure if COVID's still around, which it might be. We might expect another kind of a skewed year here. I'm calling 2020 a skewed year because of the actual metrics. I mean, it is what it is. And so I'm thinking the more COVID out there, the more we should hunt desperately for one of the top running backs in 2021. So just wanted to consider that as well. So let's look across to the 48th running back, and I like to just look at the averages across the years and the loss. And the loss is related to the gaps between the top and the bottom there. So what's the distribution of the running backs there? Is it really spread or is it really compact? And that could make a difference on drafting here. So in this case, I looked at the top six, the next six, and percentage loss, and looked at the top five uh, averages, and we see 2018 was one of the top five, but in 7 to 12, 2020, 18, 19 were not in the tops. And notice 225.7. Remember, I said we had an issue last year, a skewedness. If you look, that was the worst in 18 years, folks. So metrics finds that skew, and is anybody talking about that? No, nobody's talking about it because it's not being found because people are not using the metrics-based approaches to dig these nuggets out. So to me, that's a nugget, and the hypothesis being that COVID cut the production of some of the downstream running backs. So based on the cases, in early summer, I think the more cases, the more likely I will be scrambling to pick early running backs. That's because look at 18 and 19, completely different in the metrics here. So need to really pay attention. And 304 was one of the worst years on record as well. So even in the top six. So remember, the data actually showed you was the top three that were producing. So we were taking a bath in a fourth, fifth, and sixth, and continued down to the 12th. The loss or the gap is 26%. That's not low. It's not the highest. Somewhere in the middle. So I circled purple the lowest loss. That means the running backs tended to do closer to the same score in the top 12. Okay. And so that would have favored more of a later running back. Okay. And we haven't seen that. So there's nothing here that supports a zero running back situation. And it may have worked in 8, 10, 12, and 15, but you would have had a harder time making it work from 16 on. So if, some of the theories and whatnot are out there, maybe they worked based on just kind of the environment, but I'm not sure it's stayed the same anymore. Certainly the metrics and the percent loss would suggest it, in fact, has not stayed the same, and the the running backs are spread out more, and that tends to point towards more of an early running back situation to me. Here's the trend lines, looking at the loss in orange. So we had a high loss early, so you can think from 02 to 2020. So this was the early years, and this is where we're at today. We did have a trough here, right in this range. As far as the top six average, we peaked a little bit, then in 2020 we dropped down. And the 7 to 12, it's been a lot steadier. It actually peaked and then dropped in 2020 as well. So if you threw out the COVID year, it would almost imply, this where we should have been. Some more points for everybody, but I'm not sure the gap was, the loss was any different. So just be aware that if this decline was COVID related, we could see, if that ever does go away, we could see a bounce back at a higher production for these 12 running backs. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that point there. 13th through 18th and 19th to 24th. The lower percent loss, we actually saw that last year. So that means the running backs from 13th to 24th were more closer together, and that tends to make and favor more of a later pick than an earlier pick as far as using your draft capital. Notice the non-COVID years, the gap was a little bit bigger, tending not to support such a late running back in these blocks of players. Notice 15, 16, 17 all had low and more of a condensed running backs as well, so that would have favored later. So 2015, zero running back worked because the later players were almost producing as much as the earlier in each little segment. That's what you need to make it happen. So in this segment, we actually in 2020 saw another change after the top 12. So notice things have not been steady. Okay. So your strategy probably needs to change with blocks of players in your drafting. So running back 1 types, we just showed you. This is the running back 2 types. And I think the strategy flips a little bit. I think we were going early running back in running back 1, but for a late running back 2, you could wait it much later. So if COVID's around, that would be the default pattern, coming up. Here's the trend lines. I do notice that the losses for the RB1s were here and here. Notice the losses here, if you look at the high, would have been there and there. So you're losing less in the running back 2 versus the 1. So that's been an overall trend, and that's driven the zero running back process. Okay, but if you dig deeper into that, it's not as quite as overall a way to go. So there's subtleties that people are missing. They're just kind of broad brushing the approach, and they're missing opportunities based on a deeper analysis, which I'm trying to provide you here. But it is noteworthy that the loss between the top and the bottom is much, much lower here. And notice, you could just look at the gaps here. Look at the distance. Even closer still. And then go back to the previous chart, and you'll see the gaps are much higher. So running back 1s on average are going to be riskier because there's a lot of variation from the early to the later running back 1s. Okay, you're dropping down in fantasy points. Okay, so just consider that trend. Here's running back 3s, the top end and the bottom end. Lots of concentration to be seen in these guys. Notice in the COVID year, we did not see that. We actually saw a spread out. So now, more reminiscent, look at 16. It's the second highest spread that in 18 years. So the strategy then would be skewing towards the early RB3s, ignoring the late RB3s. So we did early, late, back to early now in the first, second, and third running back situations there. Very intriguing. So your zero running back is missing more of a kind of a switching pattern. It's not, it's not one size fits all. So I believe those that just kind of use that, it's a crutch, and you need to be thoughtful about what's going on. Okay, so if we look at the trends again, this shows the loss in the RB1s. Here's RB3s. Notice 2020. Oh my goodness, this is approaching near RB1 loss territory here. Very skewed. And notice we saw some of that back in the olden days. So there is precedence for the RB3s to have some really interesting variation there. Notice the gap is almost on top of each other, but notice the gap's a little wider right there. I know, can you measure that? Okay, it's not just greatly wider, but it is wider, and the loss clearly different there. RB4s, kind of like RB3s, probably be going earlier in the RB4s than the later. And you can take a look at that and look at the data here. Some of the worst back half RB4s than we've seen in recent years, if you compare that number. And as well as the tops hasn't been as strong. So I think COVID was taking a toll even into RB4 territory here. Same thing, look at the loss, but notice the loss is getting close now to RB1s. So we kind of had low loss, and now we've made our way back up here. So very intriguing. Variation. How does variation look? Variation means the distribution of the players in each segment. So we're taking a look at the variation. Red circles imply high variation. Blue circles, low variation. So you can see the skewing of the RB3 front half and RB2 front half. And notice the 1 to 6 is highest in variation. So we dropped off after the third running back. And notice we see also some drop off here. And it looks like the back end of RB4s are pretty stacked each next to each other. So it's not a real clear approach to early running backs or zero running backs. In fact, the pattern in 20 would have been to grab the top 3, and after that, I'm not sure you should have waited to the back end of RB1, then come back to early RB2, then come back early RB3, then probably at that point take a back end RB4. I think that would have been the pattern. And that would have been the way to approach that. But again, this is always hindsight to look at that. If we look at the patterns, I think it's very clear that variation in 1 to 6 up here, 1 to 6, is so much different than all the rest of the segments. It's just remarkable. It's like a completely different animal, right? Dinosaurs up there, and saber-toothed cats down below, right? Completely different apples and oranges. So when you're fishing in the early running back round one types, you're having to buckle. There are probably some failure rates that are pretty high, and the variation is very tricky, and the uncertainty is going to be much higher. So the only thing I know to do is to try higher amounts of research and try to really nail down, the target players and maybe some type of tier or a ranking kind of thing where you really dig deep here. But I'm telling you, that's where you should spend a lot of your time, is trying to weed out the top six and maybe even the top three versus 4 to 6 is the way to look there. At least if we have another COVID year, go back and look at 2020 and think about what pattern or graph would have fit the data, right? I know we're backfitting. Hey, I see on stock stuff, they'll sell you all these softwares that basically allow you to so-called test your models. It's backfitting. It's called redboarding at racetrack, right? Where the tout sheets that you'll come in and you buy. We had 20 winners yesterday. Woo woo. That was yesterday. Okay, that was last year's data. This is this year's. So I have addressed some of that, and sometimes last year's rankings are predictive. I had a whole lesson on that with the quarterbacks, and I will now, in the next parts coming, we will address that as well, and the running backs. So just be aware the patterns that are suggested from 2020 and historically, and where the highest variation is where you should probably do a lot more research. So that's the end of this block of material, uh, and we will come back with part 1B lesson that looks at the running backs. So I got like 4 lessons there on running backs. So anyway, this is the process. My name is Dr. John Bush. We're having extra amount of fun, and while everybody else is goofing around and playing baseball, we're figuring things out. So good for us. Thank you for listening. Let's hope I end up helping you crush your league. Okay, come back. More lessons coming.